But there did remain some sonar contacts which the Loch Ness investigation had got. And there were three we didn't really understand. I still don't.
So there were sightings at other lochs in
yes,
Scotland?
absolutely. At Loch Mora, a boat was allegedly rammed by a creature. But the best example is actually what happened on the coast of New England in 1817. Hundreds of people saw a multi-humped sea serpent there.
Adrian Shine has spent more time investigating Loch Ness than anyone alive. 50 years of expeditions, hundreds of reported sightings analyzed, countless hours scanning the depths with sonar and underwater cameras. If anyone knows what's really in these waters, it's him. So I came to Scotland to ask him directly, what are people actually seeing in Loch Ness? Because the sightings haven't stopped, the sonar readings haven't stopped. And after years of research, Adrian's conclusions about Loch Ness are not what most people expect. Here, overlooking the very waters that started it all at the legendary Loch Ness Lodge, Adrian's about to tell me what 5 decades of research has actually uncovered. And what he revealed will change how you see this place forever.
What evidence would you need to become a full believer that there is actually something in the water?
There will be a Loch Ness monster as long as...
This is the truth about Loch Ness.
Adrian Shine, welcome to Today I Learned Science. I'm so thrilled to be speaking to you today. And for people who may not know you, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, you are an expert on Loch Ness, not just the loch itself, but also the Loch Ness monster, and probably the expert on all of this. Would you say that's correct?
It's awfully nice of you to say so, but it's given me a lot of fun for quite a long time.
And how did you end up even coming to Scotland, and what drew you to Loch Ness?
I came because of the controversy regarding the Loch Ness monster, which I'd shown an interest in from childhood and through my school years. But for me, it started much earlier than that, when I was nearly 8 years old on the east coast of England, when I saw my first sea serpent. My father was the first to use the word. It was a line of humps moving across the horizon. It was the classic multi-humps of the sea serpent. And I also remember what a local man told us the next day. They were actually birds. And so it, on the one hand, it piqued my interest in this unsatisfactory situation that people saw sea serpents, but they weren't necessarily believed in. But on the other hand, I'd been introduced to a skeptical explanation, and so I have brought a certain sympathetic skepticism. I accept that people are honest in what they are seeing, and sometimes fairly accurate in terms of what they are seeing, but there's often something behind it which will change the interpretation of what they're seeing. So I could say, I saw a sea serpent, and it's okay for me to say that because I perceived a sea serpent. But what I could not say is that what I saw was a sea serpent. That is a matter of interpretation and opinion. And that's the attitude that I have to the things that everybody sees.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of what draws everybody, I mean, at least it drew me to the Loch Ness and Loch Ness Monster. This idea of this legend of a sea serpent, as you said, living in the loch. So you come here in the 70s, and what do you find? Like, how did you start engaging in the research?
Well, I'm very lazy, and I always seek the soft option.
Okay.
And so I didn't even come to Loch Ness. Authors and investigators before me had seen Loch Ness as a stepping stone to the much bigger question of the sea serpent. I've recently committed a book on the subject. The things that people, reputable people, have seen at sea. And the first investigators, Rupert Gould I'm talking about, had somehow got into the loch up the river and couldn't really get out, and so it would be amenable to identification. And in fact, in many ways, it was, because of the investigations of the 1960s. But the investigations of the 1960s were surface watches intensive surface surveillance. They failed to reproduce the classic pictures that we all know and love. They'd reached an impasse in the peaty, dark water of Loch Ness because thoughts had turned to underwater photography, and they'd been stymied, in effect, by the dark, peaty water. You may remember the flipper picture produced in the 70s. Well, there's more to it than peaty water. It's a very murky business altogether, actually.
Okay.
But at that point, you see, Loch Ness was not unique. There are lakes in North America and in Sweden, across all these latitudes, and also in Scotland that have similar traditions. Loch Ness had this tradition. And a previous expedition to mine had found there was a good pedigree of sightings, you see, but the water was very clear.
So there were sightings at other lochs in
Yes,
Scotland?
absolutely, at Loch Ness.
Oh,
That
wow.
was, in fact, in 1969, a boat was allegedly rammed by a creature. And I read the newspaper articles, dragged out the maps, found that Loch Ness was only half the length of Loch Ness, and thought, well, this is a chance.
Yeah.
And also I was aware that creatures great and small rise towards the surface at night, vertical migration. And so I hired a rowing boat and a pair of oars, and I rowed out onto Loch Ness with a sea anchor and drifted at night.
Very brave.
Sort of live baiting.
Yeah.
Well, young men are immortal, you know. And so, well, I'm afraid the beast declined, except for one dusk when I saw one. A great big hump cruised out from behind a promontory as I was rowing along in the dusk. And I took my picture, closed the range, pushing on the oars, and it was a rock about that high, about that long.
Okay.
But the perception
Right.
was there. I was 9 miles from habitation. But what I noticed was that the water was very clear. And so that was where I spent 7 years before I ever came to Loch Ness.
That's amazing. And what you talked about the humps, and I think the photo that you're talking about, for me, is the most iconic photo of the Loch Ness monster, which is
Yes.
the surgeon's photo from 1934, I believe.
That's right.
And for something like that, what is your explanation for that? What is that?
Well, it was, of course, the iconic picture. It's the one that we would all associate and recognize as the Loch Ness Monster. Well, it was also seen as the epitome of the plesiosaur interpretation of sea serpents.
Right.
Because throughout the 19th century, the multi-humped serpentine stereotype evolved, if you like, into the plesiosaur idea because of the fossils that had been found by Mary Anning, and the plesiosaur had been described. It had a serpentine neck, but it seemed more down to earth, more rational, more feasible, if you like. Well, the trouble is that recent paleontology has shown that this is one thing that the plesiosaur could not do, and it's all to do with the spinous processes of the neck vertebrae. Now, they can have a lot of vertebrae, plesiosaurs, and the elasmosaur might have 70, which would suggest a very flexible neck. But the trouble is these. And these stop. It can bend the neck down, but you cannot bend it up.
I see.
So the one thing that suggested the surgeon's photograph was a plesiosaur, was showing the one thing that a plesiosaur could not do.
Interesting.
So, having got that out of the way, what was it?
Yeah.
We realised that it was a very small object, but we didn't know what the object was. Was it a fake? Was it a mistake? Was it a water bird? Was it a bit of tree or something? Well, in the end, we found out that it was actually a fake. It was a head and neck on a toy submarine.
Oh, come on, really?
Yeah. it was made by the stepson of another flamboyant character called Marmaduke Wetherell, who had planted hippopotamus footprints on the loch using one of his trophies, a hippopotamus foot ashtray.
Wow, very interesting.
So he had a lot of fun out of Loch Ness. And, but that, I'm afraid, is the stereotype blown. It also means we don't have to think plesiosaurs anymore.
Because that seemed like the most logical or possible explanation. Like, okay, the plesiosaur, that's something we know in the rational world. Potentially it could be that, but no, that is not the case.
At least they existed.
They did exist, yeah.
They did exist. So
Yeah.
in some senses, it was more down to earth than the sea serpent idea. But of course, it was a reptile, and Loch Ness is very cold. If not for adult reptiles of large size, certainly for reproduction.
And I think that's a good segue to talk about the geology of not just Scotland, but Loch Ness. And I think that also provides a good understanding of how these mythology, these legends come up. So what makes the geology around Loch Ness so unique?
Well, it isn't entirely unique, but it is very special. Loch Ness lies in the Great Glen fault line, which tears all the way across Scotland. And it results in a very deep loch, not particularly wide, but very deep. It is a fault line. In fact, there's probably been a lake here in Jurassic times, but we've had the ice through here lots of times since. And the last of our ice melted 10,000 years ago. So anything in there has come since then. And in the case of anything big, it would have to come really from the sea. And that was the focus of both what my predecessors did and the way I thought about it.
And when you came here in the 1970s, you were doing initial research for 7 years in the different lochs. But then in 1987, is that right? You launched a massive expedition. I think it's the largest scientific expedition at Loch Ness to this day, if I believe so, right? What was that like, even leading something of that scale? And what did you guys find from that?
Well, by the end of the 70s, it was pretty clear that the stereotypes of the sea serpent and the plesiosaur were nothing to do with what might be in the loch. That part was over. But there did remain some sonar contacts which the Loch Ness investigation of the 60s had got, which we didn't understand. And I sort of was there to sweep up the pieces, if you like, and use scanning sonar, like a sort of underwater radar scanning around. But the great difficulty was we didn't have any GPS or anything like that, and it's very difficult to ascertain whether an object was actually moving. But we put in hours and hours of sonar patrol, and we accumulated about 40 contacts that we couldn't really understand. They seemed deeper and stronger than most of the fish population. Subsequently, we've realised that a lot of the fish population was smaller than we thought. But we were also concerned about tethered debris of some sort. Fishermen dropped things in the loch. Even investigators had lost cameras in the loch. One has recently been recovered from 50 years ago.
Wow.
And it's still dry, but it was on the bottom of the loch.
That's amazing.
So deep scan was big, yes. I had a fleet, but it was simple because we were using simple echo sounders. The great thing about an echo sounder is that if you get a contact, it's underneath. You know it is there.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but you know it's there. And I had a follow-up flotilla, so a contact gained in this line of this curtain of echo sounders. If a contact was gained, they would drop a float, radio in. I would send a position-fixing vessel in to take a position. And then we would come back afterwards and see whether it had moved. That was the strategy. That was the idea. And there were bits of tethered debris. But they were all close to the bottom. And there were three we didn't really understand. I still don't.
Really?
It might have been some form of mutual interference between the sounders, but they certainly weren't huge. That's the point.
Got it. And I've also read that you built your own submarine.
That was at Loch Moura.
Oh, that was at Loch Moura.
That clear water I was talking
Oh,
about.
wow.
That's right.
And so you went down there and
I
looked at
did,
it.
in the shallower water, because there had been reports of patches of water moving along close to the shoreline.
See.
And so exploiting that clear water seemed to me to be the lazy way of getting around the problem at Loch Ness,
Right,
which
the peaty
was
water.
peaty, dark water.
I see. Well, that's very cool. I don't think I've known many people who have built their own submarine and gone down.
Well, it's the lazy way, you know.
I think that's...
It was all cold and chilly and boring being on the surface, you know. But underneath, of course, I looked at the fish looked at me.
Was there something about going down there yourself in the loch itself and seeing the marine life up close that changed your perspective?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
It did. It diversified my interest. I was already a naturalist. I was already interested in the underwater world. But to see it up close, you could even see the plankton, you know, moving about outside my windows. And since then, of course, what I've done is to use Loch Ness in a way like a vehicle to understanding and increasing the appreciation of the deeper Scottish lochs, particularly the very deep water, for example. I'm not the first to have used Loch Ness as a bit of an agenda base. Sir Peter Scott used the idea of the Loch Ness Monster and naming it as part of his conservation agenda. He was the founder of the World Wildlife Fund. You may have heard of Professor Gemmell of the University of Otago, who conducted an environmental DNA survey here, which we helped with, particularly the deep water sampling. He was showcasing the elegance of that method, and it is an elegant method. We've been looking at plankton and counting them through microscopes for 40 years. But as for looking at species diversity, that's the best we've got right now. And of course, there were no reptiles in Loch Ness. And the most mammal DNA was actually human.
Wow. Well, there's something that comes about is eels. There are eels that are in Loch Ness, maybe small ones. There was a photo before, the surgeon's photo, the year before, 1933. It's John Hughes' photo. This is his photo of Loch Ness Monster, and it looks more like a sea snake or like an eel. So what about that line of thought, that it could be an eel in the loch?
Well, what happened in the 1930 was that a leptocephalus, which is the larval stage of an eel, was found by a Danish expedition. It was 6 feet long. And the larvae of our European eel is about that long, 3 inches. And so it made the possibility of sea serpents being huge eels a more rational thing. And even scientists had their minds open to this possibility. And that was one of the first ideas locally regarding odd things seen at Loch Ness in 1933. The letters to the newspapers showed that. And the DNA result, Professor Gemmell had lots and lots of eel DNA. No sturgeon DNA, no catfish DNA, but it had eel DNA. And of course, there's been speculation that might mean the Loch Ness Monster could be a big eel. But of course, the eel DNA would be exactly the same as all the little eels, because the idea is the unique eel, the eel that likes it so much in Loch Ness that it doesn't go away to the Sargasso Sea to breed, and just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But the DNA would be identical.
It's so fascinating. And the last hypothesis I've heard of is it goes back to those humps where, well, the long neck people have said the plesiosaur, maybe it's also a bird, and it's all about that perspective. It could be,
Yes.
a swan or a goose on the lake. But for the humps, there was an idea that it could be left over from like a boat or a vessel going by. Is that something that is possible?
That was what was discovered by my predecessors, the Loch Ness investigation. Yes, multi-humps, the multi-hump sea serpents are boat wakes. Either boat wakes or, in fact, from any large animal moving on the surface. The best example of the multi-hump sea serpent, which was admittedly called the Norwegian sea serpent, was an encounter by the Captain General Surveyor of Bergen in 1734. It was documented by Pontoppidan when he swore evidence in a court. But the best example is actually what happened on the coast of New England in 1817. Hundreds of people saw a multi-humped sea serpent there. No question about it.
Really?
Thing is, and this is what I've written about, that was exactly the time when the first steamship arrived in Gloucester. Now, sailing ships do not leave very visible wakes. When an object moves through water, it creates a Kelvin wake. It's a sort of a V shape, about 39 degrees, consisting of lots of little waves, which from the side, on calm water, and from lower angles, look very solid as humps. The thing is, sailing ships do not leave very visible ones because if there's no wind, they go nowhere. They are becalmed. Once the wind starts, yes, they move, but the wind is raising waves on the surface which obscure the wake. Faster the ship goes, the bigger the waves will be. And so for the first time, people saw these multi-humped wakes on calm water because of powered steamships, which of course could travel.
And I think it's such a great example of, it's all about perspective. There is always something behind it. There's always a reason behind these things.
A little bit of reason, and
Yeah.
that's why this sort of subject is so interesting, even from a scientific point of
Oh
view.
yeah, absolutely.
There was something behind it. And even if it is only with the sea serpent, yes, we've got the humps, and it was on Loch Ness that this was discovered.
Yeah.
So it was worth coming to Loch Ness. It was worth following up Gould's idea that the Loch Ness monster would be amenable to identification and thereby identify the sea serpent. Yes, it was, because they found that people were reporting boat wakes. Is one of the dominant causes. Same goes for the plesiosaur upraised head and neck. We now realise that on calm water you lose your cues to distance, and having done that you lose your cue to scale, and therefore your water bird with a long neck, and it has no trouble bending its neck, by the way, looks bigger in certain circumstances. And of course there is the expectation. So not only was there something behind what people were seeing, but looking at it the other way, it is also telling us about ourselves, what Gould defined as expectant attention. The fact that anything we don't understand or interpret on Loch Ness will become our monster that day, won't it? Whereas on other lakes you might see the same thing and perhaps attach no importance to it.
Absolutely.
So it's taught us a lot about human perception as well. And that's one of the things I'm pursuing now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And what exactly about human perception, about how we sort of build this imagination
How
around
we
things?
do, that's right. Are we primed? Are we expecting? And if we're expecting something, what are we expecting?
Yeah.
That all comes from the outside, from our societal constructs.
And I think there's something to that, because even you can be a scientist and fully believe in the science and the facts, but I think it's just very a human nature to be curious and we want the Loch Ness monster to be real. Even though we do. Doesn't matter if we're looking at facts. We still have that curiosity.
And we will not let go of it. We will not be allowed to let go of it. There was a psychologist called Festinger, and he studied our reactions to bad news concerning our worldviews. One of those reactions is denial, you know. Yeah. Maybe the investigators like myself at Loch Ness haven't tried hard enough.
Yes.
Maybe we were lax in our duties. Maybe there's a Loch Ness monster hiding in the unreadable portions of environmental DNA. Mm-hmm. That is a sort of denial. I look at it another way. I regard it as cognitive revision, as against cognitive dissonance. We try and hold on to our myths, but we make them rational as rational as we can within the conventional wisdom. Ghosts might once have been thought the souls of the departed. Now people might regard ghosts as relict energy of some sort. In the 19th century, the serpentine, mythical Norse idea of sea serpents was replaced by the more down-to-earth or down-to-rock plesiosaur, which had at least existed. Right. Extinct, but wouldn't it be good if it was extant? So we tried to hold on, and that is why we try and make things more rational. At the end of the 70s, we weren't looking for mammals, we weren't looking for reptiles, we weren't looking for amphibia. We thought there might be some interesting fish. It had all come down to a basket of fish, right? My favourite, sturgeon, which might blunder in once in a blue moon and then go away again, leaving nothing but an enigma. Or another idea was the European catfish, which some Victorians might have plopped into the catchment somewhere. And they did that sort of thing. And there might be one or two survivors. And of course, there wouldn't be any DNA because there wouldn't be enough catfish. There might be one or two survivors. They do live a long time, maybe over 100 years. You know, my sturgeon would, of course, have gone anyway. So that wouldn't leave any DNA. And so you had the eels, and so we grabbed the eels, yes. the big eels. You know, isn't that a nice idea? So it's all to do with making our myths more rational. Absolutely.
And you can sort of see the evolution of the myth depending on the era and the beliefs at the time, as you just said. Yes. You're exactly right. Your example about ghosts, like before there are these spectral visions. Now it's energy, it's real in that sense, right? So it's just about the language and the terminology we use in this day and age. As our understanding grows, so we insert our myths into them and modify them. Yes, but we don't want to let go of it, as you said. You won't let go. No. And I think that part is the most fascinating. And one thing, well, looking at modern day, so now it's 2025, there's still research ongoing on Loch Ness and Loch Ness Monster. What's that? I just recently read that Prince William had asked for some eDNA on the loch. He worked with some lab. Oh, right. And it came out as a hypothesis that, again, there were eels. But even the royal family is still, in 2025, very interested. The Duke of Edinburgh was actually interested in the 1960s. Wow. And what came out of that? He just was interested in he just wanted to be informed. Oh. That's how the royal family work. They're permitted their interests. It's just that they just like to be kept abreast of certain matters, that's all. I don't think they're any different to any of us. No, so we're just curious. They're just curious what's going on in there. Exactly. And the Loch Ness Monster, the idea that there's something in the loch, goes back so far, down to St. Columba. So do you think? No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Certainly the modern sensation was 1933. Okay. St. Columba, 565 AD. Nothing in between. Well, there is
possibly something from about 1900. But that's something I'm working on.
Okay, we won't say right now.
No.
Okay. Well, before we end here, I wanted to discuss your book that you had published last year. What is this a culmination of? So is this including Loch Ness, or has it gone beyond that?
It does include Loch Ness, but only in terms of what was discovered at Loch Ness, which solved the greater problem. The problem of the sea serpent, which is perceived as a serpentine creature. Postcards of the Loch Ness Monster in that form are still sold. So it's a stereotype that coexists, even though it conflicts with the plesiosaur idea, which you'll also find on the postcards. So the multi-hump sea serpent was solved at Loch Ness, and that's what the book says. A link has not really been made in the trade, if you like, between sea serpents and Loch Ness monsters, not in a constructive way. You see, it gets to the point where you have to stop looking and start thinking. And that's broadly what we tried to do. And we found that the sea serpents were boatwakes. The long-necked ones were water birds. And in terms of the sea serpent, it went a lot further because, yes, I had my steamships. In fact, the day before the first piece of evidence collected by the Linnean Society of Boston, of New England, a steamship had arrived in Gloucester, Massachusetts. Now, I don't think that first sighting was a steamship wake. I think it was a leatherback turtle. And I think the Gloucester sea serpent was a wake, but caused by mainly the leatherback turtle, which was not actually recognised as a turtle at that time off New England.
So because animals can also make that pattern as
yes,
well.
Yes, anything moving
yeah.
on the surface of the water will make that Kelvin wake.
Interesting.
Therefore, what I needed was an aquatic creature which would swim on the surface, preferably a big one, with a head and neck, and which swam habitually on the surface for considerable periods of time. And you're left with a turtle, but not just any turtle. The majority of turtles find their food in shallow water. It would be a green turtle eating seagrass, a hawksbill with sponges, but the leatherback eats jellyfish. And that means it is swimming in midwater and at the surface. It will not be deterred from its progress. You cannot keep leatherback turtles in captivity. They barge into the side of the tank. They won't swim round and round in circles. They're very single-minded, leatherback turtles. And so if you get one of those, and they can weigh virtually a metric ton, ploughing along, it is going to leave on calm water, and that is when sea serpents were seen. That is when they were seen on calm water, only on calm water, which is when the wakes are visible, as are steamships' wakes. So I think the Gloucester sea serpent began with leatherback turtles and steamships.
Wow. And the leatherback turtles are native to that area.
They would not have been very common in that area. They're not that common now because they're reptiles and the sea is cold. But you see, the Little Ice Age only ended in about 1850. That might have forced the leatherback range a little to the south. The first leatherback actually recorded off New England was about 1824.
Really? Okay.
Some years after 1817. But there'll always be one or two.
Right.
And they wouldn't be recognised.
My goodness.
I've got a certain amount more evidence there that leatherback turtles were not recognised as turtles.
Back then.
So that's one, that's the big one.
Got it.
And that's what I've put in the book.
Amazing.
But there are other forms of sea serpent, including long-necked ones, because, as I said, the debate evolved in the 19th century to the consideration of long-necked plesiosaurs. Well, these pole-like long necks, which are seen at sea, and I have drawn attention to orca fins. But there's more to it than just picking an animal and saying, well, that looks right.
Right.
You have to consider, as I did with the leatherback, the fact of its food source, the fact of its behavior at the surface, the fact that it swims for a long time on the surface. Most air-breathing marine creatures only just kiss the surface, like a whale, just breathes and it's down again. And the other turtles are the same, just a gulp of air and they're down again. So with the orca, if you see the fin of a male orca, it's the highest fin in nature.
Wow.
If it's coming towards you, it is very thin and sways in a rather sinister way. It rises and comes towards you. If you see it from the side, it's not quite the same. If you see it in company with the female's fins, you will not mistake it for a sea serpent. But the point is, the orca pods have a matriarchal, matrilinear structure, and the males stay within the pod, which is unusual. Normally speaking, the males go off. But in the orca pod, the males stay with mum all their lives, in fact. But mating takes place elsewhere. So the orca leaves the pod, goes and finds another pod, and then comes back again. So he is seen by himself. And some of the long neck sightings actually concern necks that are coming towards the observer. Generally, you're busy going in the direction of the other way at the time, or coming away. In advanced age, the tip of the orca's fin begins to droop. And of course, that could very well be taken as a head on top of the long neck.
That's incredible.
So, and the humpback whale's got a lot to do with sea monsters as well. That the great, dreadful monster seen by the Norwegian missionary Eged back in the 18th century, rearing up by his ship. Wow. Well, we're now much more familiar with the spectacular behavior of the humpback whale. It's the mainstay of commercial whale watching enterprises.
It's just really fascinating because, I mean, just in general, only 25% of the ocean is even mapped to begin with. Yeah. And it's so, I love looking at those old, you were talking about it, those 17th century maps of, and you see the land is not perfectly mapped, but it's there. And then you look at the ocean, it's just full of sea monsters and sea serpents because they just don't know what was there. And it just fuels all of this mythology that has trickled down into our modern day.
That's right.
Yeah, it's just incredible.
That's right. In fact, the Carta Marina is the very map.
Yep.
The North Sea is full of them. If you look carefully at those, you will see all sorts of stories, in effect. Some are very mundane. You can see flencers working on a caught whale. They're cutting the blubber off. But then there's another one of some men lighting a fire on the back of a whale. That's because whales were seen as tricky creatures that would surface, and you might land upon it thinking it's an island, and then down it would go.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And in the epic, the tale of St. Brendan, the Brendan Voyage, a whale, this is now a benign example, would allow the monks to say mass on its back. There are these linkages with these stories at the time. There's the idea that sea monsters might sink, or whales might sink ships. And you see some of the crew throwing barrels into the water and blowing trumpets, which were seen as a good way of avoiding being killed.
It's really, really interesting to go through that. But for the plesiosaur, just one last thing that came up in my head. Why was that even something that came up, have there been plesiosaur fossils or evidence in the area? Because as you said, it's
Not
a reptile. So
not in the area. Well, we do actually have our own piece of Jurassic coast at Helmsdale.
okay.
But no, this was all to do with a lady called Mary Anning on the south coast of England, at Dorset, where the first ichthyosaur and plesiosaur, well, complete skeletons were discovered.
Wow.
And it was a great controversy at the time, you know. The first complete skeleton, I think, was 1820.
Wow.
But from then on, among naturalists, it began to enter the debate. In fact, naturalists have been quite interested in sea monsters and sea serpents. It's not fair to say that they're apathetic. Not at all. It's not been my experience. We have terrific arguments. It's just that to write a paper, you need a bit more than an opinion.
That's true. That's absolutely true. Well, even with the whole Loch Ness and the story, if for you, since you have been working on this for so many years now, what evidence would you need to become a full believer that there is actually something in the water? Let's just say, for hypothetical, what would it take for you to find the hard evidence? Or would there not be? There's nothing.
I'm really struggling with that.
Well, that's the answer
I
there.
really am. As I said, it's time to stop looking and start thinking.
Exactly.
The evidence is in.
Yeah, it's already been done.
We are curious creatures, but we are rational ones.
Yeah.
Try some rationality.
Absolutely.
But look for what is behind it. And remember, there will be a Loch Ness monster as long as we want one.
Absolutely. And I think on that note, that's a perfect place to wrap it up. So thank you, Adrian Shine. It's been a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you.